Today's passage is from the book of Jonah, chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Jonah 4, 1 through 11. But Jonah was greatly displeased and became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "O Lord, is this not what I said when I was still at home? This is why I was quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." But the Lord replied, "Have you any right to be angry?" Jonah went out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a vine and made it grow up over Jonah to give him shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the vine. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm, which chewed the vine so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you have any right to be angry with the vine?" "I do," he said. "I am angry enough to die." But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this vine, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be concerned about this great city?" I want to start by telling you a story about forgiveness. In 1996, the city of Los Angeles was torn apart by 3 days of rioting following the verdict of the beating of a black man named Rodney King. And one of the most lasting images from those riots was when a white man, a trucker, was pulled from his truck and savagely beaten. His name was Reginald Denny. Mr. Denny spent months in hospitals and physical therapy to recover from his injuries. The men who attacked him were arrested and brought to trial. And after all that he had gone through, when the trial finally came, Mr. Denny walked over to one of his attackers. He gave the man a hug, and he said, "I forgive you." A reporter watching this event could only think to say, "It is rumored that Mr. Denny is suffering from brain damage." That's how this world views forgiveness. It's something foreign, it's insanity, it's brain damage. Today, I want to look at Jonah's response to God's forgiveness and God's call to forgiveness in our lives. Chapter 3 of Jonah ended with God turning away from the anger, turning away from the evil that he was going to do to the city of Nineveh. Chapter 4 begins with Jonah having evil thoughts towards the Lord. Jonah complained against God. He said, "God, this is why I ran away in the first place. I know that you are compassionate and loving. I know that you are slow to anger and quick to forgive." Jonah said he did not want God to have mercy on Nineveh if they repented. And so Jonah said, "God, take away my life. It is better for me to die than to live." Basically, Jonah said, it's me or them. Either you love the people of Nineveh or you love Israel. You cannot do both. And Jonah said, "I wish I were dead. I do not want to live in a world where God has compassion on people like that." And so God said to Jonah, "Do you have any right to be angry?" Jonah doesn't respond. Instead, he went up on a hill to the east of Nineveh and he overlooked the city. And apparently, Jonah thought that God was still going to destroy Nineveh. Apparently, Jonah thought that, there's no way that God would really have compassion on people like that. And so he sat there waiting for God to be unmerciful and uncompassionate. And as he was sitting there, he starting a little hot. It's Nineveh, it's modern-day Iraq. Sitting out in the desert was warm. And so, as he was getting uncomfortable, God caused a vine to grow and to give Jonah some shade. And Jonah was happy. By the way, this is the only thing in the entire book that we're ever told made Jonah happy. It was this vine. Well, Jonah sat in the shade, but then the next morning God caused a worm to eat the root of the vine, and the vine withered and died. And once again, Jonah was unhappy. As a true drama queen, he said again, "I wish I was dead." And God came to Jonah again and he said, "Jonah, are you really this upset about the vine?" And Jonah said, "Yes. Yes, I am." And for the third time in this chapter, Jonah said, "I am so upset, I wish I was dead." And God said, "Why? Why are you upset about this vine? You didn't do anything. You didn't tend it, you didn't plant it, you didn't water it. You did nothing for this vine to grow." Jonah had not been involved in this vine growing. It just happened. All Jonah did was enjoy the shade. Maybe if Jonah had planted and tended the vine, he could have at least some reason to be upset, but he didn't do any of that. And God said to Jonah, "You are so upset about this vine, which grew yesterday and died today. You're furious about it, and yet you don't care about 120,000 people living in the city of Nineveh." And we think about this, is a striking scene. Jonah is fine with God killing hundreds of thousands of people, but he's upset that a vine died. And God said, "Shouldn't you have compassion on these people?" God said, "This is a city filled with people who do not know their right hand from their left." That is, they do not know right from wrong. They have grown up seeing their family live a certain way, and they thought that was the only way to live, until Jonah came along to show them a different way. By the way, that's the way sin often works today. We grow up seeing how our parents live, and we begin to think that's the only way to live. And often, sins are passed down from generation to generation in a cycle. God sent Jonah to Nineveh to break that cycle. Jonah was angry that it worked. And so Jonah complained against God, saying, how could he have compassion on people like this? I'm reminded of one of the parables that Jesus told in the 20th chapter of the book of Matthew. This is one of my favorite parables. A landowner hired some people to work in his vineyard. He went out at dawn to hire some people. They went to work. Then at noon, the landowner went out again and bought and hired more people to come work. And then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he went out a third time. And he hired more people to come work in his vineyard. And then finally 5 o'clock rolls around. It's time to pay everyone. And he paid the people who had worked since 4 o'clock the same as he paid everyone who had worked all day. And of course, the people who had worked all day grumbled about this, thinking they deserved more. The landowner said, I'm not ripping you off. I'm paying you what I agreed to pay you. If I want to be generous with these other people, what's that to you? It's my money. Why are you mad that I am being generous to them? And now, God says something very similar to Jonah. He says, why are you mad that I am showing forgiveness to Nineveh? You sinned. You ran from the Lord, and I forgave you. Now I want to show them the same kind of forgiveness. Why are you opposed to that? Worry about your own sins. I want to show these people forgiveness. And so we have Jonah sitting on this hill, waiting for God to destroy the city. And we have God calling for compassion, and then the book ends. We don't know what happens yet. We don't know if Jonah ever came around to compassion. This story is, in literature, what's called a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is when a story ends with the main character having a choice to make, and we don't know what choice he made. I think my favorite example of a cliffhanger in modern literature is a story called The Lady or the Tiger by Frank Stockton. In that book, that short story, a princess falls in love with a commoner. And when the king finds out about this, he's furious. He forbids the relationship. And to solve this problem, he takes the man and he puts him in an arena with 2 doors in front of him. And behind one door is a ravenous tiger. And behind the other door is a beautiful woman. And if he opens the door with the tiger, then obviously he's going to be killed and eaten. If he opens the door with the beautiful woman behind it, the 2 of them will immediately be married. Well, the princess learns which door has the tiger and which door has the woman behind it, but we're not told which one it is. And we're left to wonder because this princess is an extremely jealous person. And we don't know if she's the kind of person who would want to spare the man's life or if she would prefer to see him dead than married to somebody else. And so at the end of this story, the princess signals to the man to open the door on the right, which we don't know what's behind that door. And the man walks to the door on the right, he puts his hand on the doorknob, and the book ends. And we don't know if this woman loves the man so much that she wants him to live, or if she's so jealous she would rather see him dead instead of married to somebody else. We have a similar situation to that in Jonah. We have Jonah demanding that God bring justice and vengeance against Nineveh. And we have God calling for compassion. And we don't know where it ends. We don't know if Jonah held on to his anger or if he came around to God's compassion. But really the challenge of this story is not in the question of Jonah. Because the goal of any cliffhanger is to get the reader to put himself in the position of the main character. The question of this story is not, will Jonah forgive? The question of the story is, will we forgive? When we are faced with the same kind of situation, how will we respond? The cliffhanger is not wondering if Jonah will have compassion. The cliffhanger is wondering how we will respond when we find ourselves in a situation similar to Jonah's. Now, forgiveness is an important theme in the Bible. It comes up again and again. We see it here in the book of Jonah. The next minor prophet, Micah, says there are 3 things that God desires from us. That we do what is right, that we walk with the Lord, and that we love mercy. Jesus said we do not forgive just 7 times, we forgive 7 times 70 times. And the Beatitudes, the opening to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." And forgiveness is good for us. It releases us from the burden of resentment. So because of all this, because forgiveness is such an important theme throughout the entire Bible, I'm going to assume that we already know its value. I'm going to start there. I'm going to start from the assumption that we all know the importance of forgiveness in our lives. But even though we know forgiveness is important, even though we know that we are called to forgive, sometimes it's still a struggle for us. So I'm going to begin there. If you know the value of forgiveness, but you are struggling with it, if you're struggling to forgive, I want to build from there. First, let me say that not all sins are the same. I often compare sin to a spiritual wound. And just like not all physical wounds are the same, not all spiritual wounds are the same. Scratch on the back of my hand. It's going to heal pretty quickly. A broken arm. I don't know what's wrong with Bill back there. If he's came in here with a cast today. That's probably going to take a little longer to heal. In the same way, there are some spiritual injuries, some sins that are more difficult to forgive. Sometimes forgiveness is an act that we do immediately. Sometimes forgiveness is a goal that we build towards. So, if you are building towards the goal of forgiveness, how do we get there? I think one of the problems we face is sometimes we get confused about what forgiveness is. So, I want to mention 5 things that are not the same as forgiveness. First, forgiveness is not amnesia. We've all heard the phrase forgive and forget. The mistake we sometimes make is thinking that in order to forgive, we have to forget.
that doesn't work. We cannot intentionally forget something. That's impossible. It's like requesting to do magic. But that's not what forgive and forget means. Pay attention to this part, because this took me a really long time to figure out. I mean, I was 40 years old before I understood this. I had been a preacher of the gospel of God's forgiveness for 15 years before I understood this about forgiveness. So here it is. Forgive and forget are not a single action. Rather, forgiveness paves the way to forgetting. We do not forgive and forget all at once. Rather, we forgive first. And that leads us to being able to forget. And it can't be the other way around. We cannot forgive something that we have forgotten. Rather, when we forgive, then that decreases the impact a sin has on our lives until finally we are able to naturally forget about it. But they're not a single act. Rather, it's forgiveness that leads to forgiving. Or excuse me, forgiveness that leads to forgetting. So, first, forgiveness is not amnesia. Second, forgiveness is not acquittal. It's not saying that someone didn't do anything wrong. It's not saying that they're not responsible for what they have done. It's not saying that there's no one to blame. Really, the reverse is true. We can only forgive when someone is to blame. When we recognize someone's responsibility, then we can forgive. And forgiveness does not mean that later we pretend that it didn't happen or that somehow it just didn't matter. Forgiveness is not acquittal. Third, forgiveness is not an award. We cannot earn forgiveness. We cannot deserve forgiveness. Anyone who deserves forgiveness doesn't need forgiveness. Forgiveness can only come as an act of compassion. We do not earn forgiveness. It can only be freely given. Fourth, forgiveness is not approval. When I forgive someone of a sin, I am not saying that I approve of what they did. I'm not saying it's okay. Again, the only time I can forgive someone is when they have done something that is really not okay. So when I forgive someone, I'm not approving of their action. I'm not decreasing its importance. I'm recognizing that it's not okay, and I'm choosing to forgive. Fifth, forgiveness is not acquiescence. That is, it is not a license to keep on doing the same thing. When I forgive someone, I'm not saying you can now keep doing that. Forgiveness is not acquiescence. Saying just keep going. Really, in a mysterious way, is forgiveness that allows us to change. When we are forgiven, that begins the process of change in our lives. As one writer put it, forgiveness is given in the face of the knowledge that the future may or may not be different, but with the enabling hope that it will be. Okay, so I've talked about what forgiveness is not. Now let me tell you what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is accepting and loving a person as distinguished from their actions. Forgiveness is recognizing that someone has done something wrong, and it is choosing to love that person despite what they have done. It's not forgetting about the event, it's not approving of it, it's not saying they can keep doing that. It's saying that I will choose to love that person apart from anything that they have done wrong. That is forgiveness. And it's not easy. Maybe you are struggling with forgiveness. Maybe you recognize what forgiveness is, but there's still a sin that is just difficult for you to forgive. You want to forgive, but you're struggling to get there. So at the close of this sermon, I want to talk about 5 things that we can do to forgive. 5 steps to lead to forgiveness when you are struggling to forgive. First, pray. I don't think anyone's surprised I start with prayer, but it has to start with prayer. It has to start by going to God and asking for help in forgiveness. When we pray in God's will, when we ask God to do what is good and what he desires, and he gives generously. So if you are struggling to forgive someone, ask God to help you forgive. Second, start small. Start by forgiving simple things. Let me use an analogy here. Let's say I decide to take up running. Let's imagine I get up tomorrow and say, all right, today I am going to run to Cleveland. It's not going to go very well. If I'm going to take up running, I don't start the first day by running a full marathon. I start small. I practice running. I build my strength so that I am able to run farther. In the same way, if you are struggling to forgive someone, start small. Start by forgiving simple things. Practice forgiveness and build up to the more serious things. Third, recognize your need for forgiveness. Self-righteousness kills mercy in our lives. If I think that I am basically a good guy who doesn't need to be forgiven of anything, then I am going to struggle to forgive others. When I recognize my sins, when I understand what I have done wrong and what I need to be forgiven of, then that makes it easier for me to forgive others. Fourth, practice empathy. Empathy is imagining yourself in someone else's position. Scientists have discovered that the part of our brain that is active when we practice empathy is the same part of our brain that is active when we forgive someone. They have discovered what the Bible and common sense have taught us all along. When I put myself in someone else's shoes, then I'm more likely to have compassion on that person. It builds towards forgiveness. Fifth and finally, if you are struggling to forgive someone, if you want to forgive and are struggling to forgive, then make a commitment to forgive that person. The commitment to forgive itself moves us towards forgiveness. Now, make this commitment to another person, not the person you need to forgive, but to someone else, to your spouse, to your parents, to a close friend, to an accountability partner. For instance, I might commit to my wife that I will forgive another person. I'll state that commitment to her. That moves me towards forgiveness. Along with this, you might consider a symbolic gesture. For instance, you could write down on a piece of paper what it is that has been done to you, how you've been wronged and who has done it. And in detail, describe what it is that you need to forgive. Then take that piece of paper and use it in a symbolic gesture. For instance, our sins have been nailed to the cross. So build a cross, small one, and nail the paper to the cross. Or tie it to a helium balloon and let it go. I'll give you a symbolic gesture I really like. Take that paper and now go find a rock, a pretty rock, more like a decoration than a piece of gravel. And wrap that rock in the piece of paper. And then carry that piece of paper with a rock in it wherever you go. It will serve as a physical reminder of a spiritual weight in your life. And then when you are to the point that you are ready to forgive, throw the rock into the lake. You are releasing yourself of a physical burden while symbolically letting go of resentment. Forgiveness is not always easy. Jonah knew that firsthand. He knew the struggle to forgive. And Jonah ends with a cliffhanger. It ends with the question, will he forgive or not? But the real question isn't if Jonah forgives. The real question is, will we forgive? In a moment, we're going to stand for our invitation hymn. And as we stand to sing, if you have been struggling to forgive, you know that God has called you to forgive, but it's hard. If you have been struggling to forgive and you need to make a commitment to Jesus Christ, to his forgiveness, you have an opportunity. This week, to all my Give a call to the elders. Give a call to me. Or even right now, if you need to make your own commitment to forgiveness, you have that opportunity. I ask you, stand with me for our invitation hymn, which is Wider Than Snow, number 436. And we'll sing just the first verse.